For some reason, people who really rail against transgender people participating in sports say things like, and I've read this literally, that transgender women compete in women's athletics because they want to uh, they want to win where they could not win competing against cisgender men. And then I've also heard others say, well, they're just trying to get into the women's locker rooms or bathrooms so that they can assault them. Really, to me, preposterous ideas that really fuel the propaganda against transgender people. Um, and so, aligned with my series of videos about the science of transgender identity and research, politics, and policies, I'm going to talk today about transgender identity development within the context of gender identity development. And I think that's important. It's hard to understand transgender identity development without really knowing something about gender identity development. So let's take a look at that. And let me give me a minute to start my screen. There we go. Like to start from beginning. Okay, so this is what I've titled it, Gender Identity Development, Implications for Transgender Research. And so I'm going to take us all the way back to 1975, some work by Slaby and Fry, and really most of the models for gender identity development have been kind of like building blocks or sequential. I'm not going to go through all the different theories, but in general, we believe that at ages 2.5, 2.5 to 3 years, children can usually state their gender as aligned with their sex assigned at birth when answering the question, are you a boy or a girl? And by ages 3 to 6 years, children are increasingly able to consistently understand that sex does not vary over time. And by ages 6 to 7 years, almost all children reach full gender constancy, meaning that they get it, that gender identity or people's gender really does not change over time. I would argue that in a way that kind of leads to some of the bias about transgender people. Um, and so let's talk next about gender identity being multidimensional. Gender identity is not one thing. And so we can go back to Egan and Perry's work, and they categorize it in, as 4 parts. So it includes one's knowledge of their membership in a gender category, experiencing compatibility with one's gender group, and that includes self-perceptions regarding gender typicality and satisfaction with one's gender, and experiences of pressure to conform to gender category, and attitudes about gender groups. Okay, so that's a lot, and it probably is very boring to you. I find it pretty exciting because prior to this work, people didn't really conceptualize gender identity as so multidimensional, made up of so many unique characteristics. At one point, we just pretty much assumed that people just knew that they were boys or girls, and that they started to do that at about age 3. But the components involved weren't clarified. Okay, so they make a statement that I have a little quote here about. These dimensions of gender identity are not strongly related to one another, yet all relate to psychosocial adjustment. And so one of the things that they found was that people who feel pressured to be gender nonconforming have harmful sequelae. it's not self-perception as gender typical or atypical that is problematic. But pressure to be gender conforming is harmful when gender contentedness is low. And so, as they state, and I quote, children who wish they were the other sex, who desire to engage in cross-sex activities then, are at risk for problematic development, mainly when they perceive their social environment to be telling them that they cannot be whom they wish to be. Okay, and what's important here is that this statement appears in a paper about the multidimensional development of gender identity in general. They did not study transgender identity, but they do make this point. And I think it's really important to note that it is not intrinsic to people's gender identity or being gender atypical that is the problem. It's really the social pressure to be aligned with what others perceive one's gender to be that creates most of the psychosocial problems for people who are transgender identified. Okay, so let's talk now about the development of transgender identity. Now, one of the areas in which I've done a lot of my work is childhood gender nonconformity. And one of the issues is that childhood gender nonconformity is an indicator of transgender identity, but it is also very strongly associated with the development of adult sexual minority orientation. And I published a book a few years back with Dr. Jack Drescher, a leading authority in the field, and drew together a lot of different experts in the field, making the point that really there was not a consensus about whether or not child gender nonconformity is really related to adult sexual minority orientation. I could go on and on about that, but I won't, because we're going to continue talking about the development of transgender identity here. And so I talked earlier about the ages of gender identity development. And what's interesting there is that even though gender constancy seems to develop by about ages 7 to 8 or 9, ages 10 to 13 years are a critical point for experiences of gender incongruence and gender dysphoria. And I have a couple of citations for you to check out the materials that I'm citing are referring to. And as always, I encourage you to read it, look it up. I don't expect you to just agree with me just because I'm saying it, as people like Matt Walsh and Riley Gaines seem to. Okay, so key factors motivating self-identifying as transgender seem to be the onset of puberty, sexual desire, increased peer pressure for gender role congruence. And what's really notable is that gender affirmation by others appears to be associated with lower levels of depression and anxiety. And so the work that I cite, notably, which Doyle also refers to, the relative quality of the research was rated as fairly low or moderate. And so we can say, yes, the research generally suggests that, but the research is not terribly strong, and we do need more longitudinal research. But the main point, or one of the points that I made at a conference developing a consensus statement about sexual orientation and suicide and gender identity and suicide, is that it's possible that people who identify as transgender may decide that their sexual orientation is more aligned with heterosexual if they are more attracted to someone of the opposite or different sex than they were assigned at birth, primarily because there is a trade-off if one adopts a sexual orientation as lesbian, for example, um, the number of potential partners decreases considerably. And so you're basically trying to get matched with other women who also identify as lesbian, or as individuals who women who have sex with women. And so that's an issue. Okay, so I think that is the end today. Do leave comments. I'm sorry, this is probably boring, but the main point that I want to make is that this is evidence-based. I've given you citations, and these are things that other proponents of anti-trans rhetoric and propaganda do not do. They don't seem to want to point to specific research that the audience can check out for themselves. And so I do encourage you to do that. As always, if you have any questions at all, just leave me a comment. I do reply. And thank you for watching. Leave a thumbs up or a thumbs down, and leave a comment. Thank you. Have a good day.